This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Dan O'Brien, K-State grain economist, begins today's show with the grain market update discussing local cash and futures. He says this last week, wheat has shown more optimism than corn and soybeans. We continue today's show with Samantha Bennett and Shelby Varner as they discuss the transition as host of Agriculture Today. Samantha is sad to be leaving, but is excited for her next step. K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond finishes this week's shows with a weather update. He discusses the expected but undesirable combination of weather and temperatures for Kansas. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start this Friday show, as we usually do, with a grain market update with K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien. Dan, thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Shelby, thank you very much for having me.
Let's get started, Dan, with where are we looking at for grain markets?
Well, we've been watching the futures and price movements, and they've been affected quite a bit in the last few days by international geopolitical issues, and much less weather in Kansas. But as we closed yesterday on Thursday, we saw May corn, which is now in the delivery period, close at 646, markedly higher than where the July contract is. Most of the grain elevators and grain processors, grain buyers are pricing now off the July contract. So if you go from the 646.5 for May and really where the market's really functioning, about 589 for July corn, you can see you have quite the differential. And then we fall off in for the December harvest time contract. What we'll be paying attention to price-wise, once we get to harvest, that's down to 528.5. The soybean contracts, very similar situation with May in delivery now at 1448.5, and then quite a drop-off down to the July contract, but the elevators are pricing off of down to 1417.5. So drop of about 30 cents, 15 cents a month. New crop bids dropping precipitously down. Don't want to use just too much hyperbole, but I guess they have dropped quite a bit, down from 1417 in July down to 1268.5. So you can see for both the corn and the soybean markets, we're still looking at, we have an expectation in the U.S. of sizable crops and prices dropping off quite a bit from now into harvest. And I think proportionally you see that more so in soybeans than for corn. And that's probably because of large foreign crops, mainly in Brazil coming into play. And we're watching wheat also, May contract in delivery at 845, and then the July contract, which is now the lead contract we're pricing off of, cash-wise 798.25. So drop of about 46 cents. But surprisingly, as you go on from there, we're not seeing the futures drop off that much in wheat. We've had quite a bit of volatility and positive price movements in wheat in the last year or so. And I talked a little bit about before we came on air. You've got issues happening between Russia and Ukraine, and the UN involved with trade issues. Yesterday, the world, economic news was kind of shaken a bit by a drone attack, in Russia, and accusations flying back and forth. So all these issues come into play and tend to shake up not just some of the financial markets, but they shake up the commodities, and that's where we're at. So market prices holding up decently. But as you look then at where we're at cash-wise, if you start, say, with the Hutchinson area, and look at where cash corn prices are at, they're at about $6.82. And historically, that's a wonderful price, but we're off a bit from where we'd been earlier this year. It just shows the type of year it's been. $6.82 for corn, call that the spot cash price. New crop bids down to $5.28, and that's at even money with Deese corn. And how does that compare around the state? Well, the top place in the state, out in the middle of feedlots, ethanol plants, et cetera, is out in the southwest Kansas, looking at the Garden City area. Garden City, Wright, Dodge City, a lot of Cimarron, places like that all over. Very strong bids. If we're at 682 in Hutchinson, we're at the highest bid that I'd seen yesterday was $7.34. So strong prices. And really no place else around the state is above that. In fact, the Hutchinson area is second strongest cash bid in the state. Colby 679, Salina 649, Pica, etc. So we pay a lot of attention to corn, grain sorghum. Again, the Hutchinson bid 642, and that's actually the strongest bid in the state. Stronger even than the high in southwest Kansas, 639, etc. Again, the Columbus area, 625, all pretty strong, but still, again, Hutchinson standing out there. Hutchinson, amongst the strongest bids in the state regarding soybeans, actually at 1420. The strongest bid seen yesterday actually is in the Columbus area down southeast corner at $14.34, 1427 in Topeka. So, you look around the state and you wonder, well, where are our processing plants? Who's involved with putting shipments together for a train load to go wherever? So Hutchinson standing out pretty strong new crop bids also, 1219, 1218, 1213 in parts of eastern Kansas. And of course, the crop that is the newsmaker right now, or that we're really wondering about, is the wheat crop. And the prices, strongest prices in the state yesterday in the Salina area, 798, Hutchinson, 784, Topeka, 788, 768 out in Colby, 773, Garden City, 770 in Columbus. So we've had rains recently. We have a Kansas wheat tour coming up. We've been struggling for wheat exports to the U.S. Still have a lot of questions. I don't doubt that our colleague Rami Lolulato and others of our agronomic friends in the state can address the physical shape of that crop. However, there's a report that came out of Oklahoma just a day or so ago that identified or gave their estimate of what the size of their crop was. They were just really indicating lots and lots of damage. So we've had some rain that may help to deal with the situation. But I guess in our shop here at K-State, in Western Kansas, we're hearing a bad number of reports of wheat having to be turned in or sprayed or do whatever just because of a failure of being able to get through the winter. So, Shelby, we're sitting in a situation where for these crops, we have great prices, but historically speaking, but some of the reason for that in these local areas is that we have very spotty, in some cases, really, really rough production conditions. But it's not uniform. Wherever they caught a rain, caught moisture coming through the winter, and we may be able to come through here, but I just don't think. So really kind of a question will be in that Kansas wheat tour, what will be the average yield? That's coming up in a couple weeks. But if we got a 40 bushel yield this year, I think people would be very, very happy. Mid-30s, I've heard talked about quite a bit. I think that average yield down in Oklahoma was a lot closer to 30 or below than anything in the mid-30s. So we'll be watching on that, I guess.
Dan, Chip, further on in our show, discusses what the weather and the impacts and the hopes that we see moving forward. But right now, what are your thoughts on feeding grains, the corn and sorghum?
Yes, corn and sorghum markets. We talked a little bit about price trends. We had been at about 645, about as a high a couple of weeks ago for the July contract, which we're watching now. Dropped down to about 570. Have recovered now to about 589. What would a person's thoughts be on where corn is going? That we're planting. And we'll be dependent on moisture and developing crop conditions here and around the U.S. for the next 30, 60, 90 days at least. So we're in the time frame when, if you look at the historic volatility, that it's come basically now. Now we're in May and in July, and May and June and July. I would say if you look at some of the technical indicators on July futures, they're at about 25, 26 on a scale of 0 to 100. That's a relative strength index. 50 is neutral. 25 is bearish. 75 is tremendously optimistic. So we're just around 25. So the markets right now really don't seem to be having any expectations of any, I guess, threat to this crop. And I guess we'll just have to see how the crop develops, how it comes up, and how it sustains itself when the heat comes. Look at that same type of perspective. If you look at where we're at on soybeans, really that same index we're just slightly more optimistic. For soybeans, had similar drop-off, almost the same pattern. We'll be waiting to see, how the crop develops. And for wheat prices here of late, if I look at the relative strength index for that, that's come up a little bit more of late to about 50. So some of the dry conditions, some of the threat of what may or may not happen in the Russia-Ukraine wheat export business are all at play. And so if anything right now, wheat prices in the last few days, this week, have actually displayed more optimism, more upward momentum than corn and soybeans. So, and for most of the winter, that was just the opposite. I guess we'll see where we're at in the next 2 or 3 weeks when people actually get out into these fields, and we'll see if we can avoid stress or not.
Dan, you said wheat earlier was a newsmaker. Do you think it's going to continue to be a newsmaker moving forward?
Yes, I do, but both for our domestic issues that we have here. Again, what crop will we have? And there are concerns about how much wheat will be seeded up in the north, in North Dakota, South Dakota for hard red spring. So we have that, and this rattling of sabers that's happening overseas in the Black Sea region between Russia and Ukraine. So I think that you add all that to the backdrop of wheat on the world markets being as tight as it's been since 2007, 2008, particularly from a world less China perspective. And there's just not a lot of room to go to sleep on the risks that this market has. And, you stand back in my thinking, wheat's such a vital human consumption crop. And yes, some poorer wheat will feed the livestock, but mainly it's a short step from the wheat field to flour manufacturers to human consumption. And we're just so tight internationally that I understand why the markets might be sideways to lower at present times, but there's just an awful lot of risk to have to be dealt with, much less what could happen geopolitically over in the Black Sea.
Dan, thank you so much for once again sharing your knowledge on the grain markets. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Shelby.
That was K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien with his weekly update of the grain markets. We're cutting to a short break now, but we will be back with more on Agriculture Today. You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and we are joined now by a unique guest. She's not new to the show by any means, but right now we are going to be transitioning, handing off the baton, so to speak, hosts of Agriculture Today. Sadly, my time here at K-State is coming to an end, and we'll get into that more in a little bit. But before we do, I just wanted to take the time to introduce your new Agriculture Today host, Shelby Varner. So, Shelby, thanks for being here.
Samantha, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Absolutely. Well, I'm excited for you to be picking up the baton, like I said, so to speak. And you're not a new voice for Agriculture Today. Like I said, you interned with Eric in 2021, and you were his last intern.
Yes, I loved getting to intern with Eric. I definitely learned a lot from him. I was sad to see him go, but I was glad to hear, Samantha was coming on to join. And I'm excited to be back on Agriculture Today and learn more about agriculture for myself and to share it with producers.
A unique situation. Did you ever imagine when you ended your internship that you'd be back a year or two later in the actual host seat?
Absolutely not. When I did leave, there are comments like, oh, too bad this job wasn't coming open a year later for you to take it on. I was like, oh, I'm not staying in Manhattan after graduation. Turns out I am staying in Manhattan after graduation. It was just kind of a lot of things that I really love doing. I love getting to connect with people and talk about agriculture. And if you know anything about Agriculture Today, this is the place to do that.
Yeah, it's the role that perfectly suits someone that enjoys those things. Mm-hmm. So, Shelby, I think this is going to be a role that you love and really enjoy. And, agriculture isn't foreign to you at all. Obviously, you're an ag comm student here at K-State. You're a senior. You graduate in, T-minus a week at this point now. How does that feel?
It's kind of surreal that I've started my job before I have graduated. A couple weeks ago, I had no idea what I was doing after graduation, and then kind of like gas pedal to the floor. Here we are, and I'm now talking with the fantastic host, Samantha Bennett, and transitioning into working on Agriculture Today.
Well, you're taking it with full stride, so you're doing a great job. I know we talk often about training for this position being like drinking from a water hose, and you have done a great job.
Thank you. It's exciting. You have also, I'm sure, got to drink from a fire hose in the beginning, so I've been very grateful for all your tips and pieces of advice as we move forward onto this next chapter for Agriculture Today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I teed up for this a little bit earlier, but Shelby, you're no stranger to agriculture. This isn't a field that you're foreign to at all. So tell us a bit more about your background.
Yeah, so I grew up in what I like to call my little town of Towanda on a family farm. That family farm is currently operated by my dad and uncle, and definitely a family process. As my mom says, it always takes a team. And so we have a commercial cow-calf operation, row crops and hay. And then a little over 10 years ago, my oldest sister, convinced my parents that we should get dairy goats. So now looking a little over 10 years later, we still now have dairy and meat goats. So that's been quite an adventure. From there, I learned a lot. I love my family, and I went to Butler Community College, got my education there, loved my professors, but knew I wanted to continue to grow. And so I headed up here to K-State to major in agricultural communications and journalism. I interned with Eric in KSRE, and then I moved on to Kansas Farm Bureau, where I got to do their podcast and just learn another avenue of agriculture and a different kind of view of agriculture, and I really enjoyed that. But now I am happy to come back to K-State and work with Agriculture Today.
Absolutely. And I know from previous conversations that we've had during your training, AgCom is something you've sort of always known you've wanted to do, right?
Yeah, it feels kind of like a rare case. My junior year of high school, I was scrolling through and I was like, I feel like AgCom is something I like to do. And I think part of that comes from I grew up in 4-H and I really like speaking about that. And then we had tours come out to my family farm. So just getting to share agriculture with a bunch of different types of stakeholders, I loved it. And so when I saw agriculture and communications combined, I was like, that's for me. And I've stuck with it and I've loved everything I've learned.
Wonderful. Well, you are definitely in the right role for that love, that passion. This is one that will allow for you to spread your wings and really run with that.
It is. I'm excited I love learning random information and information that's also important. And so I feel like Agriculture Day is the place for that. I get to make connections with awesome people that I would never think I would talk to. And so, getting to create that and carry on the legacy of the greatness of Agriculture Today is really just an honor.
A legacy, yes, indeed it is. We're approaching our 100-year anniversary of the show next year, so you'll be a part of that process, most likely, and ensuring that it goes on and is celebrated as it should be, so that's exciting to say the least. So when it comes to you, however, what you're going to enjoy about this role, as you look into, once you get settled more and more as time goes on, what do you think is going to excite you most about this position?
So definitely still on the worrisome of getting my feet underneath me and getting going. But I'm excited just to make all the different connections across K-State and the Midwest in general and get to learn those random facts of knowledge. I'm a big fan of continuous learning, and I'm excited to continually learn about agriculture. And Samantha, now that you've been here for almost a year, what was your favorite thing when you came into Agriculture Today that you've said, that was what I loved about this job?
Honestly, you echoed what I love most about this job. It is a job where you learn something new every single day. And we're only able to do that, us in this position, because we have such incredible experts here at K-State. And really, that's what I'm the saddest to be leaving most of all is our incredible experts here and the friendships I've formed with them. And they're just amazing human beings, first and foremost, but they're also just so incredibly smart. And that's kind of cool when you think about it, to think, oh, I'm speaking with, some of the leaders in this industry on a daily basis, and it's just so casual. So it's really fun.
Definitely a lot of knowledge at K-State, and I'm so happy that they're willing to also talk about their knowledge and put it in terms that we can understand, but then also producers across the Midwest.
Yeah, because really that's the value of this program, right? Is we're taking those specialists and we're turning their highly scientific knowledge into something that's palatable for the masses to understand and then execute. I think that's so cool.
I fully agree with that.
Wonderful. Well, Shelby, I am so excited for you to be taking this role. I will say that was my biggest concern when I figured out that I would be leaving. I was like, oh, goodness, who are we leaving this show in the hands of? And hearing that it was you provided so much relief for me. So I'm so thrilled for you.
Thank you. I'm excited and happy for the mentors I've had that have offered their help to me in getting life going forward, especially towards graduation time.
Absolutely. Yeah. An exciting chapter closing and then opening for you. And I kind of feel the same way a bit. And, I'm really sad, obviously, for this chapter in my life here at K-State and in Manhattan to be coming to an end. It's been such a great experience. It's been honestly an honor to serve in this role because we've already talked about this, but communicating just much needed agricultural information to K-State research and extension stakeholders. It's a fun position to be in, and you just know that you're making an impact, and that's such a cool feeling. You're passionate about what you're doing, and it's fulfilling every single day. So I'll really miss that aspect of being here at K-State Research and Extension.
Samantha, you say you're honored to be here, and I'm honored to have learned from you and getting the time to transition. But what makes you excited for your next chapter, and what is that next chapter?
Sure. So my next role is honestly one that if it wasn't the role that it was in the place that it was, I would not be leaving here, honestly. The opportunity was given to me to be a content producer for RFD TV in Nashville, Tennessee. And listeners, if you're familiar, we've talked about it oftentimes that I am not a Kansas native. I am a Kansas transplant for now, but I'm originally from the Southeast, mostly Alabama and Tennessee. And my roots actually run fairly deep in Nashville. So I'm really excited not only to be working for a national broadcast network, RFD TV. It's a huge opportunity to produce content for them. It won't be too different really from what I do now here at Ag Today. A visual scale added to it, a national scale. So that's a little bit of a new skill set I'll have to learn. That's a bit nerve-wracking, but I'm extremely excited to have my direct support system in Nashville and not too far away in Huntsville, Alabama. So I'm thrilled. I get to be closer to home. It's the closest I've ever lived to some of my family members in my entire life. It was an opportunity that I knew if I didn't take, I would kick myself for later on.
I completely understand that. All the respect to you, Samantha, and the great things you've done. And kind of going back to the reason of family is really important, and that's held near and dear to a lot of people in agriculture. And you're not leaving behind all the great connections you've made. You might still be hearing from them with RFD TV. Is that correct?
I hope so. That is the plan. K-State is not going to be something in, the past for me. It's something that I hope to carry with me and hopefully can share on a national level through RFD TV here in the future. So the connections will continue. It's not a goodbye, more of a see you later. I like that phrasing more. Goodbye's too sad.
I fully agree, and I'm sure I'll be hearing from you and hopefully get to see the great work you've done with RFD TV.
Well, I appreciate that, Shelby. I'm leaving Ag Today in good hands with you, and that, like I said, has made this transition all the much easier. So thank you so much for joining Ag Today, and this is me handing over the ropes to you.
Thank you. I'm excited to see where we're going to go.
Absolutely. Once again, everyone, that is your new host, Shelby Varner. She is going to be taking over the reins here at Ag Today, but we're cutting to a short break now. But of course, after this segment, Shelby will be rounding out today's program with this week's agricultural weather report, where she'll be joined by the one and only Chip Redmond, our K-State meteorologist, to provide this week's agricultural weather report. For the last time, I'm Samantha Bennett, and we'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today.
You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and now we're having our weekly weather report with K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. Chip, thank you for coming in today.
Yep, thanks for having me.
Now, unfortunately, you didn't bring rain for us, and Kansas is still looking pretty dry. Do we have hopes of that changing?
Yeah, so we did have moisture a couple weeks ago, and since then, we've really dried out across the state. Most of the state has not received measurable moisture in the last week. And as our average precipitation amounts continue to increase on a weekly basis, we're looking at deficits anywhere from 3/4 of an inch in western Kansas to up to 1.5 inches in southeast Kansas that we average a week. So we can add that to the deficit since we haven't had much moisture in the last 7 days. And after some positive news, now we're kind of sinking back down. And we need widespread moisture statewide, especially for the folks in the central part of the state that missed out on all the events and unfortunately just remain extremely dry.
Are we going to have to keep rain in our rearview mirror, or do we think we're going to see it looking forward?
Yeah, so we've had a couple spotty, isolated showers throughout the state over the last couple of days, mostly oriented in southwest Kansas. And then yesterday, on Thursday, they expanded a little bit further north and east. But we moved into convective season where these are thunderstorms. They're really isolated amounts. Depending on where you're at, you might get some, but your neighbors probably didn't, or vice versa. And that rain will come heavy, so not necessarily soak into the ground real well. Those chances will continue. They'll diminish here for a few days, and then they'll continue next week when we start to see the next system move in. But overall, dry conditions over the next 6 to 7 days is likely.
We have dry conditions. Are we hoping temperatures are also favorable, or are we going to have an undesirable combination?
Yeah, we were worried about this switch. We had go back to April, and we had a really warm start. We cooled off the end of April, which really brought some relief and needed lack of evapotranspiration with the things that were greening up. But now we're getting into May. Temperatures are escalating quickly. We'll see temperatures over the next 5-6 days be in the upper 80s to 90 degrees for a lot of the state. Way too warm for this time of year. With abundant sun and some breezy winds, I expect some big moisture demands, and it's not going to help the drought situation by any means. And it's going to need moisture even more, especially when we look at things like the wheat crop that are trying to progress, are progressing at a much shorter than they'd like it. And they really need the moisture this time of year. And unfortunately, with the heat combined with that wind, it's just not a good recipe for agriculture. So warm temperatures to start May, and we'll see how long that lasts. Right now, they're carrying above normal temperatures through mid to even late May.
You mentioned some slight chances of rain, just popcorn across the state. Do people need to go out and do the rain dance, and hopefully they're the lucky ones to get a little bit this next week?
Yeah, rain dance never hurts. We do look at the next phase in the MJO starts to become more favorable after this week. So towards the end of next week and then into early the following week, we see it come into favor again where we could potentially see some increases in moisture. This is the same kind of event that we saw with the precipitation in the Southwest late April. So hopefully some more widespread moisture opportunities. And right now the Climate Prediction Center has us in above normal precipitation pretty much to the end of the month. But we just see isolated amounts with these kind of convective events, and these aren't widespread rainmakers for the most part.
So there is hope, but just not a ton moving forward.
Yeah, it won't be a drought buster by any means. In fact, the new monthly outlooks came out to start the month this week, and they have equal chances of precipitation because of the isolated amounts that we just can't detail exactly where the rain will fall. And unfortunately, they also put that drought will likely persist and potentially increase for the north and eastern part of the state that have missed the most recent rain events that are going on 14, 15 days without a tenth of an inch of rain. And so we expect drought to actually expand as we get into June.
So not fantastic news, but there is a little bit of hope and hopefully some precipitation even as our temperatures rise.
Some folks are still beating the El Nino drum. That's great news. But unfortunately, that we're not going to see the impacts of that till late summer. And so we have to focus on the current. And unfortunately, the current isn't a pretty picture with some precipitation chances, but warmer than normal temperatures.
Chip, thank you so much for coming in and giving us our weather update for this week.
Yep, thanks for having me.
That was K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond with this week's weather update. We'll be back on Monday on Agriculture Today.